Welcome to the Sages Climate Science podcast. I am your host, Laura Young, environmental scientist and science communicator. And today we're talking about innovation, which I know is very, very broad, but actually I'm excited about the two guests that we've got because actually we get to look at innovation in two quite different spaces, but talk about how we can use these two things together to help with that big problem of climate change. So it's great to be joined by Dr. Will Harcourt, who is an interdisciplinary fellow at the University of Aberdeen. And your current research is looking at developing new technologies to understand the changing state of glaciers and ice sheets. And one of the things you've focused on in the Arctic is that it's warming 4 times faster than the planet. But actually, we can do something called make a digital twin of this environment, which is very cool. And this is a digital replica of the physical phenomena that are happening there. And this is a huge amount of data that we get to play around with and visualise and see. And a lot of that comes from satellite images, which is fantastic. You also do a lot of fieldwork. So you do also get out and about and you deploy sensors, you fly drones, and you study the impacts of climate change to these environments. And it's very interdisciplinary, combining different knowledge across disciplines for both the Arctic and globally the environment. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
I'm also joined by Dr. Szabolcs Pap, we know you as Sabi, and you're a researcher at the Environmental Research Institute with the University of the Highlands and Islands. And you do this environmental research, but you're also an environmental chemical engineer. So it's great to have different disciplines here. You have a whole broad range of interdisciplinary research interests, but you focus on a few things in particular: the adsorption and filtration technology for removing emerging contaminants. So that's all the nasty stuff. That's the way I think about it. Also, biochar synthesis, which we will hear a lot more about as well, and how that can be part of different feedstocks, wastewater treatment and nutrient recovery, and also lots of knowledge exchange. And you were actually part of a small team that won the prestigious Innovation of the Year award at the Scottish Knowledge Exchange Awards in 2023. And you had the opportunity to discuss this biochar work with His Royal Highness King Charles and Ivan McKee, the MSP. And so this involves the interactions with lots of different partners and stakeholders to develop this innovative product, which is innovation, which we're talking about today, to meet different policy and regulatory challenges across Scotland. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Innovation is the topic of today, and obviously there's so much in that. But I guess maybe, Will, first to you. You work in these different environments around the world. What are some of the ways that you've traditionally had to measure and monitor the environmental issues that are happening in the Arctic or in the environments that you sit?
Yeah, so I think if we look back to the early 1900s, we went out into the field. We went to these places. We tried to take measurements in the field with fairly simple instruments, nothing too complicated, but it was all so kind of very small in scale. We didn't know the large scale picture. And then from the 1960s, satellites went up into space. Really revolutionary. It changed the way we do science in these places, both, here in Scotland, but also across the Arctic, where, these are really hard places to get to. So satellites started to allow us to map out what is actually happening in these places. We know climate change now is changing the landscape for the worse. Glaciers are losing mass. They're retreating a lot. The whole landscape is changing. So satellites allowed us to map out where are these big changes, where the changes are happening and how fast it's happening. And then from the 2000s, we had a massive rise in the amount of satellites that went up into space, to the extent where now you could get a satellite image of anywhere on Earth, and within about 6 days, you could find out what was happening there pretty much instantly. This is incredible. A satellite takes a picture. It takes about 24 hours to get from the satellite to the database, and there we have it. So let's say there was a really big event happening, like a disaster, a catastrophe. And, these things happen quite a lot. We look across Europe right now, there's loads of flooding. You can find out and map out the extent of these changes really, really quickly, which is a really important thing to have at our disposal so that we can actually try and work out what we do with this and respond to the emergency. So that's kind of how we have been doing it and how we are doing it now. But we have so much data to work with, like so much that we can't make sense of it all. So obviously I've been working on artificial intelligence methods quite a lot recently and thinking about ways in which we can bring satellite data together using AI. And usually when we have so much data, computational speed goes up. We don't have the processing power to deal with it. AI changes everything. And we probably talk about this a little bit more as we go on, but this is rapidly changing how we deal with the large amount of data that we have and how we analyze it and get new information out of all of the data that's there.
And AI, artificial intelligence, is a real buzzword. You used it there. What does that actually look like? I mean, how have you seen it change? You know, before was it we've had so many different scientists on this podcast talking about the way that they used to have to go and take ice cores, or they had to take maps and be tracing them. How has that actually changed the sort of day-to-day of people in your field?
Yeah, I think it's actually important to say that AI has been around for quite a long time. We just don't know it in the same capacity as we do now. There's been a rapid rise in the kind of algorithms and the application of those algorithms to do new things. So this isn't a new fad. It's just that we found better ways to use them. So when it comes to computational efficiency, and when I use that word, it basically means how fast does it take to run an algorithm or a piece of software and to deal with all this data. AI speeds things up massively, in some cases by 10 times, 100 times. And this is really important. When we look at projecting how things are going to change to the future, we tend to use physical models. We can reduce the amount of time spending to run those models massively using AI. At the moment, we can start to look at new trends and patterns that we didn't know existed before. As I said before, we tended to use manual methods, even on satellite images, to trace, I don't know, how big a glacier is. Now we can do that automatically using AI, which is pretty incredible. And we no longer have to go through the archive and spend hours manually tracing, oh, the glacier was here once, it was there another time. We can do it all automatically. And now we don't have to spend any time doing that. We can do the important stuff of actually understanding the trends and what's happening and how that might change into the future. So there's a lot more work to do. I would also like to say that we as geoscientists and many people, even computer scientists, we don't really know how AI works. And this is actually a really big problem. We need to understand how these algorithms and these tools actually work in practice, because without that, we can't use them in the best way, in the way that they were meant for. So we need to actually work on that as well. We can't just apply these methods and say, hey, it does some crazy things. We need to understand what it's doing under the hood a little bit as well.
And Sabi, in your line of work, how has technology or AI come into your field? Because you've been working in this sector for many years. How has it changed the work that you do?
To be honest, maybe in this field, things changing a little bit slower, but what we still seeing changes. So just give you an example. In the water sector, how you're gathering data. In the past, there was like loads of people going on a field and taking samples, so distributed spatially, so in the space and in time. So and that all the samples being transported back to the lab and being analyzed with traditional instruments. And now this is started slightly to change, because we now have these different like portable spectrometers, and we have electrochemical sensors. And then we can maybe install somewhere on the field and measure and gather data like all the time online, and just generate a huge database, which will help us again to use that. And then maybe with the implementation of the AI, like we can actually understand a little bit better. So yeah, I mean, like I seen really fancy instrument, like it's a floating small island, like all equipped with different like instruments, and it's been deployed on the lake, and that it's there, controlled remotely, gathering data all the time, uploading into the cloud, and then people just back in the office using that data and making some conclusions. So it's changing, yeah, definitely.
Can I ask though, in your field, do you have a lot of real-time data coming into you? Like, for example, we have weather station satellite data, but do you have data that you have collecting data all the time and you can visualize it and then make sense of it? Or?
Yes. So that's what I said then. So we have this, maybe the best example is these portable like spectrometers, which plugged in into the pipe, maybe at the wastewater treatment plant, and they continuously like measuring the chemical oxygen demand or pH or conductivity, and then and generating real-time data. And it's just been sent to the computers in the office, and people can see it and see the pattern. An example, a good example, if we have loads of wastewater treatment plants based on the coast, and then if the conductivity is rise, that means then somewhere in the system we have like some infiltration of the seawater, because that's going to increase the conductivity of the water. So we immediately can react, because there's no need to someone to go out and grab the sample every hour or every half day. We can continuously have that data generated with those portable instruments, and we can see and we can react immediately.
And I think you've highlighted quite a few of the barriers actually to fieldwork, which is, I did environmental science. We went on those field trips where you got your waders on, you stood in a river for way too long and had to take your samples, and you weren't actually sure if you were doing it right. But so it can address those barriers. But I guess, Will, for the work that you do, does it also help when it comes to some of the criticisms? Because we are talking about climate change, and that is to do with carbon, and that's often to do with flying. And all your lot are kind of flying all around the world to go to these, amazing, beautiful places quite far away. Has it helped with the number of times you need to go, or that kind of impact to the planet by flying around visiting these sites?
Yeah, this is actually a really good point, and it's something that has come to light recently. I have been to the field quite a lot in the last few years, and
where do you go? Where when you talk about the field, what places have you visited?
So I go to the Arctic, and I've been to Svalbard quite a lot. So Svalbard is north of Norway. It's 78 degrees north. So in the middle of nowhere, very very remote. So you do need planes to get there, and that means a lot of carbon. So we've been discussing a lot about how we can offset carbon. That's one way, but actually, in these places, we need to monitor these places. We need to continue to understand how it's changing. And satellite data has a massive impact on reducing the amount of fieldwork that you have to do, because you can do so much more now with satellite data and all of the AI methods I was talking about. But we still need data from the ground to validate, calibrate all of the measurements that we have. That will continue to be needed in the future, and that's not going to stop. What we have been trying to do in places like Svalbard is to use local people and not require us to always go into the field to take measurements and to install instruments. So where we can, we try to install instruments for a long period of time and get them maintained by local personnel, by staff there. That is really helpful. There's no need for us to go up. So we're trying to do things that way. But it's hard, because there's a lot of people wanting to do measurements there, and we can't always use people all the time, largely because we don't have the funding. We have to pay these people, and they should be paid to do it, but we don't always have the money to do this. So there is a kind of trade-off between, yes, we want to be sustainable, we also do need the money to be sustainable at the same time, and that's not always easy to come by.
But I think that's nice that in this space where you can address some of these barriers, it is kind of easing those pressures. And I guess I'm interested, you're talking about looking often from space down to the planet and looking at things. And I feel most people will be familiar with forecasting things like weather, so kind of predicting what's coming up or accurately measuring really what's happening. How are you able to use that forecasting kind of measurement, but for what you're looking at when it comes to ice, snow, and other things that satellites can pick up?
Yeah, so I'm going to start talking about digital twins. This crazy buzzword.
What is a digital twin?
What is a digital twin? I get asked this all the time, and everyone looks at me and says, what the, I have no idea what that is. So a digital twin, as you said in your introduction, it's a digital replica of something physical. Oh, okay, what does that actually mean in practice? Well, digital twins came from the engineering world. We have digital twins of offshore structures. We have digital twins of pipelines. You may even be aware of this in your field. But no one's ever tried to make a digital replica of something like a glacier or a forest, because it's really difficult. We've never really had the data before to be able to do it. But to be able to build a digital replica, it has to be a twin. It has to literally replicate exactly what that physical thing is doing all the time. So we need a constant stream of data from as many sources as we can get to be able to replicate that. And we can combine all these measurements using all the artificial intelligence methods I talked about before. There are methods like generative AI. This is something that's become quite a big topic about literally filling in gaps, making data based on trends in data sets. So we're working on a few topics like that. But the big thing that you can do with a digital twin, and okay, so it's a real-time system, it's literally replicating what's going on. The system itself has inbuilt in it statistical data and correlations between different data sets that tell us about how different variables correlate with each other. So let's say we can forecast the weather, and we can do that fairly well now. We know the relationship with between different changes in air temperature and wind patterns and snowfall and what that does to glaciers. So we're trying to now see if we can forecast using the weather forecast to see, okay, is a glacier gonna grow a bit now? Is it gonna flow faster? Are we gonna get more snowfall? Are we gonna see more iceberg carving? We're trying to work on that using this digital twin idea. But it's a really hard space to do this in, because our models aren't really good enough to do that yet. We've been able to simulate far into the future, but doing these short-term forecasts has been one of the biggest challenges that we face. But AI may be one of the solutions to this, but we just don't know yet.
AI is this completely new world, and we are learning every day a little bit more. I guess in your field, Will, is AI the answer to sustainability?
That's a really big question. So I think the growth of AI has accelerated massively in the last few years. So many people are now using it, and so many people can use it because there are so many off-the-shelf tools that we can just use now to apply it to some data and say, hey, we can look at all these new crazy new trends in what's happening in the world. But there's a slight concern in me that says these new tools are a lot more complicated than we believe. I don't think they're not something that we necessarily know how to use properly. Now, computer scientists have developed these tools over many, many years. Many people in that world don't necessarily know how to use them, but I think we need to build up the skill sets in being able to apply them in the proper way and not just apply them in the way that necessarily we're doing right now. There's a big topic about image visualization and classifying what's in an image, big topic, and there's loads of tools that now do that, but we got to the stage a little bit where we're just applying it and saying, hey, we can now classify all the glaciers on the world and where they are and how they're changing. But we can't actually do that. It's just the fact that people can apply an algorithm and make some data. So moving forward, I really want to see a lot more development in training young scientists and training senior scientists and how we use them and where to use them. Because this isn't just a factor of the development of new code and new computational software. We need geoscientists like us here in Sages to tell people how to use it, where to use it, and in which situation we should use them to. That's the kind of the criticism of it. But the positive side of this is that there's a massive sustainability factor. I think AI can really help improve our sustainability, help us reach our sustainable development goals and our climate targets, because like I kind of said before, if we can use AI to, reduce computational speed, and computers have a carbon footprint associated with them, if it means that we don't need to go into the field as much, we should really be developing these tools as much as we can to get to that stage. But we just need to be a little bit careful about it. There's a big move to use ChatGPT. This has been this big new software that's been developed in recent years, and it's got a little bit of criticism because it generates information that sometimes is false, and we need to be extremely careful about that. So actually going back to what you discussed about regulation, there's obviously a lot more AI regulation coming out, and that's good to see, but we need to do a little bit more on that, I think. But, these tools are there to help us. We need to learn how to use them properly and train people how to use things like ChatGPT in a good way. It can make code for you. And that's great. It means you don't have to write lumps of code all over again. But, let's not forget these skills are really, really good for people to have. You don't want people to lose that. So there's a slight dichotomy between ensuring people can do their job well, but making sure they don't lose out on their skills at the same time.
And I think that is a perfect example. I was speaking to one of my friends that's a teacher, and they're an English teacher in high school. And I just posed the question, is ChatGPT a nightmare for you in your line of work with young people who've got access to the internet? And she was saying that one of the tasks she's now giving her students is, she says, go away and ask ChatGPT, or I feel I should say, or any of the kind of AI platforms, but go away and ask it to write you an essay on, you know, this novel or this poem. And then she gets them to bring them in, and the activity is they go through them. And they go through them and they mark them and they pick out and analyse what it's written. And I guess it's that critical thinking of them going, oh, actually, that's totally got that bit wrong. That's not even a line in the novel. That's just made up, or that's not actually what that means. And through that process, she's getting them to understand that actually things like ChatGPT are going to be in our lives forever. And we need to learn to work with them rather than totally trust that it's completely right, but also realise that it can have great benefits. It can kickstart ideas. And actually, I think that's helpful. And hopefully that's a helpful illustration, because actually what you were talking about, for example, with image classification, actually it could be amazing, but just because it's put something down as a tree or a piece of sand or a loch or whatever it might be, a car, doesn't mean that actually is right. And we need to learn to live with it. So I think that was a really helpful illustration at how we need to live and work with AI. So thank you.
There's a really interesting thing going on at the moment, that if you ask ChatGPT how many R's are in the word strawberry, it comes up with 2, which is completely...
No, it's wrong, isn't it?
Wrong.
I was glad to check.
And every time people go into it, it keeps coming out saying there are 2 R's in strawberries, and it obviously doesn't have 2 R's. It's got 3 R's. 3 R's? Yes. Yeah.
We need to ask it.
We need to ask it. So it can't even learn something as simple as that. It's a really interesting example that, you know, it's it may get some things right, but there's a lot of things in there that are completely wrong.
And one of the earlier episodes was actually the cryosphere, snow and ice, understanding why it's important to think about what's locked inside these icebergs and glaciers, and what happens if more of that begins to melt or more of that begins to come off. And obviously water has a huge impact on climate and flooding and different aspects. And I guess thinking, Sabi, towards your work, actually you do work alongside the water environment and particularly the water sector, and thinking about that specific industry, what are some of the challenges that they are facing in terms of environmental issues, in terms of climate change, and how is your work using innovation to try and address some of that?
There is loads of things in a water sector, and which are like right now big issues, and then we need to address those. For example, emerging contaminants. So we're using more and more chemicals in everyday life, and then we're just flushing down on the toilet, and then that's going to end up in the wastewater treatment plants. But wastewater treatment plants are designed many years ago when most of these contaminants were not present in the water. So they are absolutely not designed to remove these contaminants, and then they're just ending up in a surface water, in the rivers, in lakes, and in a marine environment. But also there is like loads of other things like climate change, because climate change changing the distribution of the water, changing the water cycle on the planet, and that's causing like floods. We just seen in the past 1 month we had like 2 big flood events across the world. The first one in the Eastern Central Europe flood event in Poland, Hungary, Austria, and these countries were impacted with the floods. But I'm from Serbia, and then I spent there over the summer, like just about a month, and then I haven't seen the rain at all, and all crops almost died because of the drought. So that's all related to the water and to the water industry. Because of this, water industry needs to react with the pumping and distributing the water from places where is a lot, on the places where there is water scarcity. That using loads of fossil fuels, it's a high energy demand process. So I can go on with these the example, the loads of technologies at the wastewater treatment plants using enormous amount of chemicals, metal salts, polymers, the basic treatment method which is present almost in all wastewater treatment plants is a biological treatment that generating loads of methanes and nitrogen oxides. Probably if we're talking about the greenhouse gases, methane is 28 times more potent like a greenhouse gas than actually carbon dioxide. So there's loads of challenges in the water industry what we should challenge and try to resolve in the next few years.
Yeah, and I think that's important. And I mean, the way I always like to think about greenhouse gases, because we talk about carbon dioxide is the most common one, and we sort of gauge things based on that. But there is other ones, methane, like you mentioned, and they have different strengths. And I think sometimes it's hard to understand that. But the way I like to think about it is, maybe this tells you more about me than science, but I like to think about it like alcohol. So alcohol is a broad range, but a beer is very different to a shot of tequila. And I guess that's sometimes how I think about greenhouse gases is you can have beer greenhouse gas, which is like your carbon dioxide, which we sort of mark as one. And then you can have methane, which is like a shot of tequila in terms of how much impact it has when it goes into the atmosphere. But I wanted to go back actually, when you talked about contaminants in water, that's all the kind of nasty stuff. And maybe we can think obviously about what goes down our toilet. So you've got paper, pee and poo. That's all that should be going down there. But when you talk about other contaminants, what else is going out there? Is that things like pharmaceuticals, I guess, from what we take? Like what else is flowing in? Or is it also stuff that is coming off our roads and going into the drains? What kind of contaminants do we find in water?
So it's we like to call this as a cocktail of contaminants.
Going along with the alcohol theme, this
exactly,
is
to
perfect.
follow your theme of the conversation. So yes, we can to this emerging contaminant category of we can mix into this cocktail like pharmaceuticals, antibiotics. And then through that, we have antibiotic resistant genes. And then it's all together causing antimicrobial resistance in the environment, which is, again, a buzzing word right now in the water sector. And then we need to react about that, because if we will not react on time, we can end up in the next 50 years, then some basic flu can bacterial infection could kill an individual, because the antibiotics will be not effective anymore. But also, example, we have pesticides, what we're using in agriculture. We need those chemicals because the ever-growing population on the earth requiring more and more food. To keep up with these tendencies, we need to produce more food, but there's loads of bugs out there, so we need to use pesticides. But that is just going off from the plants, from the soil, and ending up in the water. We have microplastic and nanoplastic. So that's coming from when you're washing your clothes, example. That's a really huge source of these pollutants in the water. And then we again just heard in the news, like it was a few months ago, then the first time scientists detected like nanoplastic in a human brain. So that's kind of pollutant which not really like knows any barriers. So because it's just it's stable and small, and then penetrating through even now from through the human cells. Then we have nutrients, and then we will talk about that a little bit later in more details. But example, we have loads of nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, which causing eutrophication and algal blooms. So that's kind of like a state in the water when there's no oxygen, and then nothing can exist in those conditions. So yeah, like again, it's a long list.
No, I just wanted to ask, so you're talking about all these various aspects. Do we have a good handle on what impact these contaminants have in different areas of the world? I can imagine Europe is fairly well monitored, the Arctic not so well monitored for these things, but do we need to innovate, as the title of the podcast is, in this area a bit more?
It's I don't think so. Then we can really talk. When we really can say then Europe is more safe than the rest of the world, because these emerging contaminants are like contaminants which, as I mentioned, then they are not removed really well in the wastewater treatment plants. So even when you have wastewater treatment plant, yes, some of it will be removed. It's going to stuck to some, or will be, if you're using some kind of example, oxidation or disinfection, it's going to be broke down. But that's again another question. Then what's going to happen with the byproducts? Because sometimes when we have some nasty chemical and then we destroy it and breaking down on some byproducts, the byproduct is even more toxic than the original compound. So I think then that this situation is affecting the whole world, and then it just depending on the quantities of the wastewater, and then on the society, then what habit that society have, because it is just with the solid waste. Then when we saying then if the society have more wealth, more money, then it's going to generate just more waste. So that's the same thing with wastewater, and then the mixture of the chemicals, the cocktail of the chemicals which is going into the sewage system. I forget to mention, and it's really important also, the flame retardants, also on a really big buzzing word in the water sector, because we designed those compounds like 50-60 years ago to be persistent for a heat, for everything, because we wanted to protect clothes and when we're cooking in the kitchen in Teflons, we wanted to protect those to be like long-term usage and to be able to use it for a long time. But now we're seeing the backlash of that because now these contaminants are really like persistent in the environment, and we're calling it like forever chemicals, because they're gonna stay there forever. And again, the tricky things with these things then, when we taking into the consideration the let's say a classic toxic as a heavy metal, and then we're saying then if you're taking more, then it's gonna impact you more. So if you're taking a low level of lead every time, so will have a chronological toxicological effect on you. So if you're taking a bigger dose, then it's going to just kill you, because it's going to be an acute toxicity. But these chemicals are either more toxic in the lower concentrations. So it's just
But I'm thinking about as well, we've had this problem in the last year and much longer in the UK about, sewage seepage into rivers. This has been a big topic recently. And I've often wondered about whether companies are able to bypass the system because they know where we have areas where we can monitor particular pollutants really well in different areas of the UK, areas where we don't. So I'm just wondering if our system for measuring these pollutants and changes are actually good enough, and actually the large companies are able to get away with stuff that maybe we should be looking at a lot closer.
It's a good point, but the emerging contaminants are not regulated contaminants. So because that's the reason why they're calling emerging, because they are just coming into the fore, and then we don't have regulations for them. But also I will give you one example from Denmark, but just to answer your question is then all these sewage dumping and discharging in untreated wastewater into the surface water. What happened across England, like in the past few years? I just read somewhere then compared to in 2023, it was like more than 50% more of illegal discharge compared just for the previous year to 2022. These companies are getting away with this, but they are not thinking about the emerging contaminants because they don't need to think about it. Yeah, because that's the thing then we scientists talking about, and then we know they are there, but we don't have right now the facility, the technology, the equipment on the wastewater treatment plant to remove it. When they discharge in this, they just care about like these classic things like a chemical oxygen demand, the biological oxygen demand. These are like parameters with defining the organic amount, organic pollutants in the water, or like about nutrients again, or pH or these things. So they're not really aware about this. But just to go back for the emerging contaminants and then how we are not ready. Example, what's happened in Denmark is then they have like regulation for drinking water, and then when someone in the government find out that they are like flame retardants and they were forever chemicals, they somehow push through to the regulation within a year. Then like water companies need to have this, I don't know what is the number, the maximum allowed concentration of the flame retardants in the drinking water, and it was higher than that. And then basically none of the water company in Denmark was ready for that regulation. So because they don't have right now the technology, because as I said, they are already in a low concentrations. And then now the regulation said then from one day to another, you need to even more bring down that concentration. But how? With what technology?
And I think this is the other side of the coin, right? Because we're talking about innovation. And actually in the past, we've innovated to create fantastic chemicals that are flame retardant, that are non-stick pans, that, you know, have amazing uses. But what we've not thought about is actually how long does this stick around for? What damage does it do? It's like plastic, actually. You know, plastic is fantastic.
Absolutely.
It just never disappears. So we use it totally inappropriately. And I actually first came across forever chemicals not through anything scientific, but through the movie Dark Waters. And it was that
really
story. So good. And such a powerful portrayal of big business versus water versus a lawyer. But actually at the end of the day, it was versus just a farmer, like somebody and their wider community. And you've got Erin Brockovich as well, another fantastic movie about kind of contaminants in water. But it's kind of put me on this train of thought about, you know, people actually sometimes see or feel and experience these changes. I'm also a dog walker, so I take my dog out and I see blue-green algae, which sometimes pops up in places and you think, okay, don't let the dog in there. I'm also not going to go swimming there. Or you see on social media people with videos of, you know, polluted water, you know, sewage coming into rivers, which is lovely. And I guess for you, Will, this kind of citizen science, people capturing things themselves, whether it's anecdotally, through movies, through social media, does that complement the stuff that you're doing with kind of satellite imagery? How do those two things coexist? Because I guess one is like just regular people capturing what's going on in their communities, and the other is the scientific community gathering data.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to go back to a life before glaciers. I did once upon a time look at seagrass in Africa, which is a completely different world to what I do now, but that was using remote sensing. And the reason why I mentioned that is because there was some people at that time creating an app called Seagrass Spotter. So you can download this app. I believe it still exists. And people can go out, find seagrass. So seagrass is a flowering plant. I hope that's right. I'm not a biologist. I'm probably going to get my previous collaborators to tell me, "Oh, Will, you don't know anything
You're too
anymore."
icy now.
I know. But actually, you get seagrass all across the world, even in Greenland and Iceland.
Wow.
But anyway, you can take a picture of the seagrass. It will tell you what species of seagrass it is, and you can geolocate that. And then you put it on this app, and then over time, you get more and more locations that tell you where seagrass is. And the reason why that was so useful for that particular world is that it's really hard to map seagrass. So my job when I was doing this work at Edinburgh Napier was to try and map the spatial extent of seagrass in Kenya and try and understand how it was changing. It's really hard to do that because it's underwater, and measuring stuff underwater from satellites is extremely difficult because it's so far away. So this citizen science approach allowed us and allowed seagrass researchers to actually map out where seagrass is and get a much better picture of the spatial distribution of it across the world. And you genuinely can't do that through satellites. You could do it potentially by going everywhere on Earth and taking someone and saying, hey, there's seagrass here, but that's going to take a lot of money, a lot of carbon, a big carbon footprint, and a lot of time. So citizen science for that particular field, I think, has really changed the landscape there. It is actually becoming quite a big thing in the Arctic. So in places like Svalbard and Greenland, we get a lot of cruise ships that they go up there. It's a bit of a contested subject, how many cruise ships should go up. But over time, we've got more and more pictures from tourists taking pictures of the beautiful glaciers up there. A lot of these cruise ships have weather stations on them. So as they track around, we can get measurements of air temperature, wind direction, speed, and all of these things, and feed them into models and atmospheric models to forecast what's going to happen in the future. There's actually a project right now happening in Svalbard, which is really cool, where they attach weather stations on the back of snowmobiles in winter when it's really hard to do any work anyway because it's extremely cold, minus 20 degrees, 24-hour darkness. But you can go out in your snow scooter, and over time, they've got more and more tracks, more and more data covering a wider region. And they take this data, give it to the meteorologist up in Svalbard and say, hey, there's your data, do what you can with it. And now they're improving the models and the forecasts of what the weather's going to be like in a few days' time. So citizen science has a massive role to play, even in places like the Arctic, where it is genuinely quite remote. And we should be using it a lot more. There is a question on accuracy and how good the data is, and I'm sure you've probably come across this as well. There is a little bit of calibration to do with that, but if it's sometimes just to document when and how something is happening, we should absolutely be tapping into this, because quite often we aren't there as scientists to record it. So let's use this information to kind of help us build our models, build our measurements, and build up the narrative of what's happening. So absolutely think we should be pressing this a lot more.
It's definitely it's about like citizen science. I think for me it's a major point here is the collaboration. It's in this innovative space is a really important thing. Then we have collaboration with different like stakeholders and government bodies and regulators and with local community, because whatever innovation we want to do, it's and we're now talking about like innovation in environmental technology. Then it's need to be regulated. It's need to be commercialized, and then it's need to be used. And then whatever these three things you want to do, if you want to use, you need a local community. You need a farmer who's going to use that material. But it needs to be regulated as well. So you just can't say then, okay, I'm innovating now something and I'm opening a shop tomorrow and then I'm going to sell this. So it needs to be regulated. And again, like just the stakeholders are really, really important in a whole thing. So yeah, definitely the collaboration, communication is the key.
And it's quite nice to know that innovation is not just tech, right? It's people, like communities getting on the ground.
Yeah, I think there's what you just mentioned there, interdisciplinarity is really important here, because I'm a physical scientist. I don't know the process of working with people quite as well, but social scientists, anthropologists do, and I'm starting to build up a little bit of a collaboration in this space. But they have so much knowledge that we should really be tapping into, and we can't do these things alone. We need to work with as wide a range of people as we possibly can.
Sabi, you talk about, or I talk about the nasties that are in water, but you talk about all these contaminants. And if I'm right, through treating our water, we end up with something at the end bit disgusting, I think, called sewage sludge. Is that the right term?
That's the right term, but water industry now more like to use a term as biosolids.
Biosolids.
Or bioresource. Because it's true, it's a resource.
And to me, that I don't know what we can do with that. Could you tell us a little bit about, on one hand, what impact does that have? But also, I know you're doing some innovative research at what we can then do with it.
Absolutely. So that's biochar is the core of my research interest in the past few years. And just to really briefly introduce, biochar is a carbon-rich material, really similar to activated carbon. And it's produced with a process so-called pyrolysis, which is a thermal, high-temperature thermal process and in the oxygen-limited environment. So it's not like incineration, it's not like just burning with open flame, it's different. And then through this pyrolysis, we getting as a solid phase of, and that material is biochar. And then, so biochar can be produced from different feedstock. For example, lignocellulosic biomass, which is a wood chip, so a byproduct or waste from forestry. And there's agricultural byproducts and waste through, and in the end, we can land on sewage sludge or biosolid. Then yes, we can produce biochar from sewage sludge. Why is this good? This is good because sewage sludge is a byproduct of the wastewater treatment, and then it's unavoidable. So while people on the earth, they're going to generate wastewater, that wastewater, if we want clean environment, needs to be treated. If we're treating wastewater, there's going to be sludge. And that's a fact. But what we are doing with that sludge and which impact that sludge have on the environment, that's a different story. So what we are doing with that sludge, we in UK, it's most of it is ending on the land as kind of like a soil amendment thing, or it's going on the landfill. Or in some communities, example, for me from Thurso, the closest is Shetlands, they have like incinerator. So they burning it, but it's not a pyrolysis, it's a different thing. So when we're talking about then it's on the land or in the landfill, it's full of, again, with this cocktail of different chemicals. It's full of pathogens, full of plastic, microplastic, but also full of useful stuffs like nutrients, macroelements, and organic, useful organic stuff. But because of these other things, it's not that easy to use just like in a raw form. So here comes pyrolysis, and then we're transferring that to a biochar. And then what we are doing, because of the nature of the thermal process of the pyrolysis, basically we're destroying most of the organic contaminants, because most of them, like pharmaceuticals and pesticides, are not designed as flame retardants to exceed that heat of 500, 600 degree. We're destroying the plastic in the material. We're destroying all the pathogens. So we're cleaning up the product, but also we're locking up carbon, because carbon in biochar is a stable form of carbon, which can last in the soil for a very long time. So why is good is to transfer, because we're ticking all these boxes and cleaning up the sewage sludge, and then producing the material which be much cleaner and then can be used for different purposes. UK right now don't have regulation, absolutely zero, nothing for biochar. The European Union have the new fertilizer regulation from 2019, I think. They are allowing to use biochar from clean feedstock. That's mean, like example, wood chip. And then they have like harmonized agreements. Then some of the countries in the European Union can use sewage sludge-based biochar, but they need to have their own regulation. Right now, we are working with other researchers and again stakeholders and with SEPA and with local communities and local producers to develop some kind of regulation for UK for biochar, which will include feedstock from not only from wood chip but from sewage sludge as well, and then to be able to use that material and in the future. My perspective, my core research in biochar is to use as a filtration material. So I'm using sewage sludge biochar to recover and remove phosphorus and nitrogen from wastewater and to avoid eutrophication, algal blooms, enriching the material further with nutrients, and then use as a fertilizer. But they have like many other application possibilities for biochar. And then I'm going to finish here. And that's example, we can put it in like as a construction industry, in a concrete, we can use as a addition in the anaerobic digestion to enhance the process, composting, and then in the soil, which again, like a whole different story, like what positive effect it have on the soil health.
Sabi, I think your point about regulation is really important, because that history that we have of creating chemicals and not actually thinking about or maybe not knowing to know what's going to happen in the future is really important. So biochar, it sounds amazing, actually quite exciting, and sometimes innovation, we can maybe move too fast. Your point about regulation seems important. Maybe you could just speak a bit more about why it's crucial that we get the regulation right when it comes to this new product.
I think it's really important to have the regulation, not just for this, for everything, but especially with biochar. It's not an overcomplicated like technology. And then when I'm on the field and talking with people, talking with local local people who wants to produce like biochar in the future, they already maybe have a kiln or something. They really like raising this concern. Then regulation is really important, because we don't want to end up that anybody can sell biochar in Scotland or in UK or worldwide and not taking care about the quality, just burning whatever they have and selling as a biochar. So that's the reason why I think that it's really important to engage with SEPA, engage with the government, and then to even maybe I think it's going slow. So that's my personal view. It could go much faster than this. But I really think then, and then I have patience with that, then we need this regulation to get it right, to have like a proper regulation which is defining what can be used as a feedstock and what is going into the process and what end quality should be there, to be sure then we will not cause more harm actually than any benefit from the product.
I think that's so interesting, hearing from both of you about how innovation comes into play with your work, whether that is being able to measure and monitor different big, huge structures like glaciers and icebergs from sitting at a computer through satellite images, and how that feeds into science that can be done every day by regular people in citizen science. But also, Sabi, your work looking at water and contaminants and waste, because that's a really important part of our environment, but it's also an industry that has a footprint. It has a carbon footprint. It has an impact itself. And actually to see how innovation is turning not the nicest of byproducts into something that actually can be really useful and can then store carbon, can actually help us mitigate, not just adapt. And so I think innovation is really threaded throughout the work that all of us at Sages do as part of our research. But it's been great to dive into both of your examples of that. So thank you so much, Will and Sabi, for being a part of this Sages podcast. And we look forward to the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us.
Exactly. Thank you very much.